All right, everyone, and welcome back. So we're going to continue our Age of Exploration or Age of Discovery discussion. Today we're going to be looking at what's going on in North America, primarily with the English. All right, so let's go ahead and begin. So we've got three basic regions that we're looking at. The first one we're going to take a little look at is the Mid-Atlantic region. That's basically from New York down to Maryland. And this area is mostly settled by English, Dutch, and German people. And we're going to take a look at some of this now. All right, so like last time we mentioned, John Cabot in 1497 he gets here and, he finds Canada, which is then going to then just move downward down the American coastline. All right, an important explorer is Henry Hudson. You guys should recognize that last name. Probably for anybody who's been up north and has gone to New York, the Hudson River is named after him, and also Hudson Bay, which is that really big body of water that's in northern Canada. Now, he is hired by the Dutch East India Company, and his job is to find a Northwest Passage. The Northwest Passage is basically a sea route that would go over top of North America to get to the Pacific. Now, this is the voyage when he would find the Hudson River. He is also going to be discovering the location of modern-day New York City. So he finds it in 1609, and when it comes to areas like, wow, this is a really nice area. The water is nice and deep all the way up to the land, which is really good for a harbor. So you can get the ships right in at the docks, and you can just unload right from the ships. You don't have to send little smaller boats out to a ship to unload cargo and then bring it to shore to unload it again. It's all just one time. And he's also going to sail upriver a bit, and he's going to see that the land is really good for farming, and he's just going to see that like this is a great area to settle, and this is what's going to lead to the Dutch starting to settle the area because he was working for them. So of course they're the ones who are going to prosper from his discovery of this area. Right. But of course, things don't exactly work out for him. Sometime during the following year, like that winter of 1610 to 1611, while he's in the Hudson Bay, his crew is going to turn on him. They're going to do a mutiny, and they're going to leave him, his son, and 7 other crew members adrift in basically a lifeboat. And they basically just, they die from exposure out in the Hudson Bay. So yeah, fun stuff for old Henry. Now, the Dutch colonies themselves, settled in the area that Hudson found, it is called New Netherlands. And it was set up as a fur trading post because North American furs were very sought after in Europe. There are some animals here that they didn't have over in Europe, like beaver, for example. Beaver pelts, their furs are a luxury good. Right now, New Netherlands, the governor, he's going to buy Manhattan Island from the native peoples who lived there, and they would found the city, a little town of New Amsterdam, after the capital of the Netherlands in Europe. New Amsterdam is actually the future New York City. Now, the purchase of Manhattan, this is a big ripoff. Basically, they buy it from a band of Lenape Indians for basically the equivalent of $60 at that time, which is roughly $1,200 today. So yeah, that is probably one of the biggest land purchasing ripoffs of all time. Right. This shows the area where the Dutch and the English were. So while the Dutch are colonizing the New York area, the English have already been colonizing in New England. So that would be like Massachusetts, Plymouth, the Pilgrims, those groups. That'd be like 1620s right there. All right. Now, the problem that the Dutch had was they didn't have a lot of people from the Netherlands that wanted to go to the New World. So they actually would have to start getting a whole bunch of people from other countries who would go to their colony to work there for them. So it became a very diverse area. You know, you would have Jewish people, you would have Italians, you would have English, you would have Dutch, you would have Germans, you would have French. There'd be a whole slew of people there. Now, something that is very important to the history of that area. This guy who was the governor, Peter Stuyvesant, he was a very bad governor. People did not like him, and you know, he basically was trying to force his beliefs on people, and he would kick out people who did not believe the same things as him. He was very intolerant. So with this, when the British show up in 1664, the colonists, because of their garbage governor, they basically just sat back and said, hey, you guys can come on in and let's see if you do a better job than Peter. And that is when New Amsterdam becomes New York. Now, some other English colonies that would be important to know about, one of them being the Roanoke colony, which would become known as the Lost Colony. And this would be because, like, the guy who was in charge, he would go back to England. He would be gone for a number of months. And by the time he came back, the entire settlement was completely abandoned. No word on like where people went. They just found a word carved into a tree. And, you know, and actually very recently, it has been it has been established like through archaeological evidence in the area of near Roanoke Island that these settlers, we basically know what happened to them now, and like that just happened recently in 2020. That we're basically the historian community is basically confident in saying that the settlers joined a local tribe of natives and they just, you know, became a part of it. Now, the first permanent English settlement in North America is Jamestown, Virginia, 1607 by the Virginia Company of London. And that right there is an artist rendering of what the fort of Jamestown basically looked like. Triangular, pretty decent defense can be had with that design. A lot of people going into the Mid-Atlantic region, which I guess you could say would partially include Virginia. They would come seeking religious freedom and economic opportunities. So just kind of a blend of everything. Now, Virginia and other southern colonies, they were primarily settled by people looking for economic opportunity. They wanted to make money. They all basically had, they were basically just like the, you know, religion that's going on back home in England. They just carried through with it here, but it's all about the money here in the South. But the settlers of Jamestown, you know, they chose a really, really bad spot to try and build their settlement. It's basically a swamp. So a lot of disease, nothing's growing quite right, you know, just really bad. Starvation was abundant. A lot of these first settlers would die. It did not start to turn around until two supply ships happened, and then we have a strong emphasis of self-sustainment being put on the colony, all because of this gentleman, Captain John Smith. Basically, he had this one rule: if you don't work, you don't eat. The only like exception would be if you were too sick to work. Otherwise, you had to work. He would start trade with the local Powhatan Indians, and who were led by Chief Powhatan, Pocahontas's father. Now, in 1609, he was injured in an explosion. Like, it didn't like blow off his arm or anything like that, but he needed medical attention back in England, and he had basically had enough of being in Jamestown anyway. So he went back to England, and he never came back. Now, trading with the Powhatans was very lucrative for the English, but it would also lead to some bad things. Now, the Powhatans, they were more into trading food, furs, and leather to the English, things that they needed, in exchange for metal tools, metal pots. Occasionally there would be a gun, but typically not. But it would be more metal goods because Native Americans, whether in North or South or Central, they did not have metal. Like, they didn't have iron that they could process and turn it into something useful. They were still sticking with wood and stone tools and weapons. Now, Pocahontas, a little bit on her, daughter of Powhatan, she would be one of those driving forces to try and have a cohesive existence between the settlers and her native people. And that, through this friendship, they could help the colonists survive. And, really good in practice in beginning, but of course, things take a downward spiral. But we'll get into that in a moment. So, two of the big things that are introduced to the English are corn and tobacco. Corn because it's a cheap and easy to produce food, and tobacco because, it's a cash crop. You can make a lot of money selling tobacco, and once it's introduced to Europe, European people like their tobacco for like the next 300 years after this. And of course, conflict is going to grow. Colonists start stealing and trying to intimidate the natives. And the natives aren't backing down. So they start coming to blows. And especially when the Powhatan realize that these people are not going to leave, that they plan on staying and stealing land and all such as that. And this would be the beginning of a very violent series of events between Europeans and Native Americans that would follow through the next 250, 300 years of history. Right? It would lose territory as well as losing their lives because of the diseases, especially smallpox that came here from Europe. All right, Jamestown. Still talking about them. The first Africans were brought as slaves to Jamestown in 1609 from a Portuguese slave ship to work in the tobacco fields. It wouldn't be until the next year, 1620, when the first women are brought to Jamestown, the first European women, and that is basically solidifying that the people are confident in Jamestown as a colony. And this is what makes it truly permanent because they can start building families and growing a population there on its own, not having to just bring in more and more people to keep a population alive because everyone's dying. So now it is a established colony. Now, the agricultural economy is primarily in the South and in the Caribbean. And this is what is going to bring slavery into the New World. And we'll be talking more about that actually tomorrow with the slave trade and things like that. So that's just a little taste of what we get into. Now, early settlers in Virginia are three different groups. We have the Cavaliers, which were wealthy people who were given lands by the king here in Virginia. We also have poor immigrants who would set up little farms in the Shenandoah Valley and in West Virginia and they would do their thing there, just on a smaller scale. And of course, then we have indentured servants. These are something we're going to get into in just another slide or two. So Cavaliers, just restating again how they got their land. Now, people who moved out to the Shenandoah was all small farmers, but also artisans. So people who have skills. But an indentured servant, this is one that you need to know a little bit too. These were people who could not afford to come over on their own, so they would basically trade a set amount of time. It might be 5, 10 years of working for somebody who paid for their ticket to come over to pay them back. And then, they can go on their way and make their life. Now, in the 1640s, Virginia has become a well-established colony, and they're going to set up the Virginia House of Burgesses. This is the first elected assembly in the New World, and it is actually what the Virginia General Assembly is now become. Like, we go from the House of Burgesses to the Virginia General Assembly. So it's like our state Congress. It's like the longest running elected body in the Americas. Now let's turn our attention up to New England a little bit. We got the Plymouth Colony, so the Pilgrims, 1620 with the Massachusetts Bay Colony. They're going to join in 1691 and all become just one cohesive colony of Massachusetts because they were separate, now they're one. Now the Pilgrims are a Puritan group, small religious group. They were facing persecution in England, so the king was just like, hey, you guys can leave. And so they did. Now they come over on the Mayflower, and before they even get off the ship, they make what is called the Mayflower Compact. And it is an agreement that when they get on land, they are going to set a series of laws, and they're going to have a government, and they're going to set up all the rules that they need to be successful. And you could say that it is the first constitution to ever be written in America. All right. Though they were persecuted by intolerant people, you would think that they would, come to light and see the error of thinking that way, but no. The Puritans were actually intolerant of people who did not share their beliefs as well. So you can imagine the kind of problems that might hold. Right. They would also practice direct democracy, meaning every person has a say in what happens politically in the colony. So no elected representatives. Everyone has a voice. Everyone must be listened to if someone has something to say. Now, people would come to New England for economic opportunities, but it would originally be mostly for religious freedoms. All right, so here is the basic map of the different regions and what modern day states and the colonies of that time were there. Though Maryland technically should be part of the middle colonies. So this one should actually be like bronzy, goldy kind of color. Something that you should keep in mind, Vermont right here is actually disputed between France, which controls Canada, and what's going on here with the English. And Maine is actually a part of the Massachusetts colony. All right, that's where we're going to stop today. And when we are back tomorrow, you guys are going to continue learning about the colonies. We're going to see what's happening with the French in North America and also some things dealing with the slave trade. All right, I'll talk to you then.